It's my great pleasure to introduce Anupama Kundoo to deliver the next talk in this afternoon's program on tools in relation to interdependency as part of the New York City Architecture Biennale. Following up on the prior 45-minute talk, maybe 50-minute talk by Alberto Estevez of UIC Barcelona, who discussed the importance of trees and bioluminescent light for urban and domestic use, among other things. I would note parenthetically that one of the themes of the work of Anupama Kundoo is liberty. This was presented as a reading place in a free library, a creation built with 3 different types of trees fixed in the center of a square space. Those tree trunks and branches were made from steel and the leaves made of salvaged books. But it did evoke a spirit of nature. It was exhibited at the Plaza de Salvador Seguí, coincidentally or not, in Barcelona from June to September of 2014. More traditional bio, and you can all see it on the Biennial website, talks about Anupama's credentials. She graduated from the University of Mumbai in 1989. Received her doctoral degree from the Technical University of Berlin back in 2008, where she was awarded the Wasserschiller Foundation Fellowship previously in 1996 for her thesis on urban eco-community design and analysis for sustainability. She's taught at the TU in Berlin and at Darmstadt in Hesse, both during 2005. She worked as an assistant professor at Parsons here in New York until 2011, when she moved to Australia as a senior lecturer at the University of Queensland. In 2014, she shifted back to Europe and began working at the European School of Architecture and Technology at the Universidad Camilo José Cela in Madrid. More recently, she was the Davenport visiting professor at Yale University in the spring of 2020, and is currently a professor at Potsdam School of Architecture in Germany and head of urban design in Auroville, which, as many of you know, is an experimental township in the Puram district in the state of Tamil Nadu in India. It strives to be a universal town where men and women of all countries are able to live in peace and progressive harmony, above all creeds, all politics, and all nationalities. Perhaps a lot like New York, or not. I think former New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio's theme of One New York could be considered in the same vein, but not with the same level of success or aspiration. To conclude, Anupama's research-oriented practice started in 1990 in Auroville and has generated people-centric architecture based on spatial and material research for low environmental impact while being socio-economically beneficial. In India, she's designed and built many buildings with energy and water efficient infrastructure adaptations, working in Auroville from 1990 until 2002, and I think in Pune as well. In terms of the New York City Architecture Biennale theme of interdependency, I would add that her stated approach to building design is based on material research that minimizes negative environmental effects. That is to say, her basic design approach is to use, quote unquote, waste materials, unskilled labor, and local communities. And lastly, one of the most notable buildings, that you can see on her website and elsewhere, has been published, built for her own residence, is titled, it's her own house in Auroville called the Wall House. It's L-shaped in plan, is a courtyard in the middle, and while modern in concept, it adopts traditional vernacular materials such as compressed earth, concrete, and steel. I guess that's traditional in some places. Most notably, a full-size replica of the Wall House was exhibited at the 2016 Venice Biennale of Architecture, where the New York Times called it then, quote, a gem among rubble. What a great introductory transition, a gem among rubble, a gem among many, many wonderful speakers. The floor is yours, and I'll get out of the way. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rick. That was such a long introduction, and you made me recall since long ago what I've been doing in this profession. So, good afternoon, everyone. I can't see you, but I know you're out there. It's a different time zone for me, but anyhow, I'm trying to tune in with you. So I'm going to talk to you about materiality of architecture and considering how materiality has affected current practice, and and the fact that it's the materiality of architecture that is causing us to think about imbalances socially, environmentally, as well as economically. I would like to focus on this aspect, and I want to bring you through 3 decades of my own research in thinking and rethinking materiality. I want to also highlight, I've mentioned time as a resource because I do want to want us to reflect a little on how today's discussion on materiality has become so externalized that we are only looking at materials and comparing them as if they were good or bad, regardless of how humans interact with the material. So I want to actually make the point that while all materials come from the earth, natural resources are finite, but human resources are infinite. And human resources and how they have been interacting with natural materials is the question. And therefore, I would like, in order to understand materiality, actually look at human resources pre-industrial times and compare them with post-industrial building culture and habits, and to look at time, human time, as perhaps a very underrated resource. And that's where I want to take the discussion. So if we look at materiality of architecture, regardless of where we are in the planet, all over the world, we have humans have built with whatever they had around them. If they had earth, they built earth with earth. If they had stone, they built with stone. If they had ice, they built with ice. And architecture for the Homo sapiens actually more or less has the same requirement of shelter. We have the same needs. We have the same needs for comfort. The climate varies, but our thermal comfort needs remain the same. And the human scale that the voids are constructed around actually is also indicated through the human hand that interacted with material right from the beginning of when the material was sourced. So we either built very simple architecture for shelter, or we built very sophisticated, iconic buildings, and the luxury and finesse had to do with how much time the human hand had engaged with the material. And by time, I also mean over time, one has learned a lot of things and a culture of building has evolved. In comparison, the post-industrial architecture has led to so much standardization and mass production and ignored the available materials. And worldwide, we are building now with the same kind of materials. Mostly reinforced cement concrete is become a vernacular material, and all the other the sizing and everything has become global standard. And that kind of standard, when imposed all over the place, is actually creating, in my opinion, these social, economic, and environmental imbalances that are causing us to consider what is sustainable and how unsustainable the last 100 years have been. And therefore, I do want to look at all of these developments from the perspective of the development of industrialization and standardization and perhaps over standardization. So here you see in the standard of housing and all related infrastructure has become so high worldwide, affordability has become a new issue, from people building their homes themselves to outsourcing them to such a point that so many overheads are involved. And you see in the foreground, you have the informal settlements. In the background, you have the so-called developed proper housing, actually in both scenarios the human being is oppressed. So and we are all creating all over the world these cities with divided, there are two kinds of urban skylines, and two cities coexist, and both are unpleasant. Also, the problem of standardization of materials has led to certain building codes and building habits that are also so influenced by the post-industrial building culture that materials like bricks and sand and whatever mortar, and how we used to use those materials are being now reduced to only infilling walls, and the central system remains reinforced concrete or steel and all of these high energy materials. And even though we all know what human society has achieved with bricks so far, if you look at all the Guastavino buildings or the ancient domes all over the world, from Notre Dame to Hagia Sophia, we know what brick can do. But today, in most countries, even in Australia where I was, I noticed it's being called brick veneer. We're not even being permitted to build with all the things that we knew how to build with. So there's a concern for the loss of diversity, and most of all, the loss of knowledge to be able to build according to the need. So, this whole, I would like to make this statement, in our chasing of efficiency, what is the point of doing efficiently things that need not be done at all? Sometimes we are so busy modifying very minute areas of our building culture. We don't often dare to question entire habits that might be redundant, or all kinds of buildings that are probably not necessary, and so on. So it's like things are running on autopilot, and we are just not taking the time. We are producing more and more codes for buildings. When we produce all these codes that enslave us or that sort of imprison us or come in the way of innovation, the codes are also being designed for over design perhaps, and for preventing assuming that people are going to build unintelligently. So there's a lot of factors of safety, etc., and all these habits are, I've noticed particularly in the developed countries, are causing high consumption buildings to continue to be built and in the name of efficiency. I would like to also just show you a couple of images of how I discovered the impact of materials on the territory. No matter which territory we are talking about, I began in South India exploring and discovering that the question of materiality begins already at the stage of sourcing the material. If you look at how old, if you take the example of brick, because brick is the oldest building material that has ever, the oldest manufactured building material, I should say, about 3,800 years ago, and the way bricks used to be produced and how much it was part of the territory, and how a brick produced in that manner uses far less energy than the ones we today produce in kilns. And therefore, all these green rating systems and all the values that we give to the production of materials are all based on high energy industrial ways of doing things. And therefore, people who don't know the complexity of these issues today don't realize that the same brick can be produced much more efficiently, let's say. So in former times, let's say farmers would not only be doing this one job of producing bricks or only growing rice. The clay that collects in that region is the one that happens to be good for baking and producing baked bricks that can be used and counter the monsoon, the area in which they actually need earth to have water resistant properties. So in order to bake these bricks, bricks are just molded on the ground. So it doesn't require any factories. They are stacked in a way that the kiln is the brick stack, and thinnings of plantations that they've planted are actually brought and used and spent as firewood. And when the bricks are, distributed, the field becomes a field again. This is a typical way of brick making. And similarly, lime and that goes with bricks are also produced in local kilns. So you can see how these kilns are the brick stack and where the fuel goes in, etc. And this is, you see, this is after the brick has been baked, and all the materials that are at the outer part of the kiln are not so well fired, but then while building, they are used in the inside of the walls, or used where bricks don't have to require that much strength or water resistance. So all these subtle ways of building and the building knowledge that begins with material sourcing are being replaced, and the knowledge around them is also forgotten. And so when I started my practice, I found it very difficult to directly build with materials you had on the spot in today's time. Everybody would tell you that this is much more expensive, it needs a lot of time. So, there was so much effort to try to save the time of the human being and the human's engagement on the site in order to cut costs. And I ask myself today, what is the cost of saving time? The Western way, post-industrial, practices that are introduced in all these countries circle around the fact that time is money and machines should replace hand work. And the question is, with all the time that we have saved, what have we done that makes it still worth doing? Is a question I've always had. Anyhow, so a lot of my buildings, as you will see, are built with materials as close to the site or from the site directly sourced. And in so doing, I discovered the value of human resource, and that the difference in how the human engages, the extent to which the human engages, makes all the difference. It's not the material itself, but the scale at which you have quarried, or the amount of time that was involved, or how much you quarried per year, and all these subtleties. And I've been, I would really like to make us think that instead of putting all the problem outside of the humans, I think the problem should come back to questioning human habits. So here you see people in that area would hand extract, or they still hand extract these slabs like in the ancient days. So, very cleverly done. So in my early projects, even though the spaces have been contemporary, I've tried to use ingenious engineering to be able to use significantly less quantity of materials, but increasing the quantity of human engagement, because I think not only the attention and the intelligence that then every construction site gets to experience, I think what happens as a consequence is that we leave behind knowledge. So while building buildings, we build knowledge and we build community. And I think these are the things that are going to finally help us in navigating the future. So similarly, I found in areas where I found potters, I tried to provide them opportunities to, rather than fear the loss of livelihood due to urbanization, I tried to divert their skills and produce products that would guarantee their involvement and help local economy. So I tried to bring in engineering knowledge to use, say, terracotta that is often used for roofs, but to improve and optimize. So in this case, it's insulated. You don't need any supporting structure. There's no wood required. And using all the knowledge we have today to produce this type of architecture, where the architecture is grounded in the local area, and the human hand leaves its imprint So, at the same time, I feel if you use what there is abundance of, you will create abundance rather than trying to use exactly those things that there are shortage of. So by looking for abundance, I mean not only in terms of material, but also skills. This is a picture of myself from 3 decades ago, where, I didn't realize, but I went with common sense, and every project I took empowered me to go along and take this kind of approach further. And today I rely on these strategies because I think there are so many benefits to go forward in this direction. Producing things locally, involving as many people as possible, and keeping the knowledge alive so that when the crisis comes, we can keep on inventing. And in that building community approach, you see that there are so many masons, and everybody are part of the questions that when answered, it becomes a kind of collective empowerment. So even the bricks that are you see here are handmade bricks, and because of various advantages, set in lime mortar, it's costs significantly less to produce not such a perfect brick, but celebrate the imperfection of what is available on the spot. This is the wall house. Actually, MoMA in New York has the drawings and the models. They have acquired them. So you see, this when I started working with the community over the years, I got more and more ideas. Here you see that these original cooking pots that they made have been used here as filler slabs to be able to create, to use the pots as a lost formwork, to be able to reduce plastering, but also to design efficient slabs like waffle slabs to be able to save about 60% of steel. You can see the gap between steel bars is about 45, 1.5 feet. I just realized it's feet and inches for you. So you've saved at least 2 bars per 3. So these are the type of things that I tested actually first in the wall house in order to eventually build much bigger spans for multi-purpose halls, etc. And then I went on experimenting. This is all the terracotta research. So the wall house was one of those projects where everything with terracotta as well as ferro cement that you see there, those screens were investigated and applied elsewhere. But you can also see the spatial research also has been there to build very tiny homely spaces and also to be able to build larger social spaces. But the very first hut that I had built was built out of round wood. I lived here for around 10 years. And I have to say that perhaps the motorbike or the solar panels, they cost more than the house itself separately, each of them. And so this is a very simple way of building. But even here, when I'm talking about time as a resource, there are many aspects of looking at time in architecture. One of them is that if you use round wood as opposed to a rectangular profile, you will land up saving years and years. Typically, just for the convenience of the builder or the architect who draws these sections, for them to draw prototype identical sections, they go for rectangular pieces. And if a round wood is used of this kind of diameter, without having to cut the profile, you might be able to take a 3 or 4-year-old tree as opposed to a 25-year-old one. So while living in these kind of simple, affordable architecture, I also realize there are so many dimensions to this time being a resource that perhaps we have to rethink the advantages of certain vernacular methods and further optimize it from this point of view, from the point of view that if we are going to actually create the forests maybe it would become much more realistic if we are ready to use round wood. I also, as I went along, realized that if we can find an opportunity in the architecture to use the time of people in building their own houses, maybe not, they are all working elsewhere, but those who want to work a little, to let them, because sometimes sweat equity is the only fund that you have in order to get a bank loan. And I think these are also very interesting strategies, even in urban areas. And therefore, it's very important to pick technologies that don't alienate the people, and to allow a lot of things to be done by almost anybody, such as these rammed earth walls, for instance. So this is a co-housing project. Again, co-housing project itself is an approach to affordability that allows us to use everybody's time to not repeat daily chores and to liberate our time to do more useful things. So this is a co-housing called Creativity in Auroville, and it's a combination of earth, terracotta, and also reinforced cement concrete. They have got streets on upper levels. One other technique that I want to share with you is entirely using human labor and time, I would say, but it's a very, very radical experimentation that I had done. It's called baked in situ earth construction. So what this technique involves is building with mud bricks and mud mortar, and then cooking the whole thing as if it were a kiln, as if and fusing the bricks to each other so that fire is used as a cement, and the whole cement becomes saved. The idea behind this is that typically, as I was explaining how industrial bricks are made, about 40% of the heat that is generated, 980 degrees, is lost in the walls of the earth, in the kiln walls. Each firing, you lose 40% of the heat you generate. And the idea here is to tap that heat into the wall and bake the whole wall and fuse these bricks to each other and the mud mortar so that the whole structure will become ceramic. So this has been pioneered by Ray Meeker, a Californian ceramist based in Pondicherry, who I did my PhD on. And I had built a couple of houses in this technique with his assistance. And you can see there are all these holes in the bottom so that the house is going to first function as a kiln, and it's going to be stuffed with all kinds of other ceramic products and fired for 3 or 4 days. And then we could harvest the products and sell them and recuperate the housing costs. It's very interesting because housing is not seen as a consumer of resources in this case, but as a producer of local building material. And I find that really, really interesting as a concept and as a energy concept as well. So here you see, after it cools down, you can take the bricks out and either finish the house, or you use also other products that you cook inside, like toilet pans, wash basins, pipes, gargoyles, all kinds of things, tiles. So these are products that Ray Meeker made in some of his houses, but there is a very big potential there to really look at housing radically differently. This is how the homes for homeless children that this project was about. This is how it has been finished finally, with broken ceramic tiles. And now I will just share with you another direction. So I talked about vernacular, having the potential to be further optimized. We looked at how age-old materials can be radically rethought. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about new materiality. So in this case, I'm also looking at how reinforced cement concrete, or let's say high embodied energy materials, can be also radically optimized. So I'm looking at ferrocement that uses chicken mesh as opposed to reinforced cement concrete that uses much bigger diameter steel and much more volume of concrete. So in this case, we are talking about just 1 inch thick, and in some cases also half an inch thick. So, meshes, we have been, this is something that is I've still been exploring. We've done a lot of work with ferrocement, but there's a huge potential to use other alternative fibers, and I have been researching in this direction. Here are some applications. One of these is a kind of Lego block type house that can be carried by people by hand. And these elements, you have to, the idea is to find forms that allow you to use very thin elements. So either folded plates, or you have to fold or bend, or, like this kind of a box thing, you have to make it rigid so that the thin material remains thin. So then you can make do with only mesh. So we've also used these finishes with pigments and stucco. We've embedded this colors into the cement surface and then waxed it. So, this kind of units can be quickly used to assemble a house or an office or whatever you want in a week. And also these louvers and doors and all kinds of things can be made with ferrocement. The interesting thing about ferrocement is that it can be produced very simply, very simple skills with household materials. Chicken mesh is available everywhere. And we've been producing it in the backyards of masons' homes so that whenever they need to earn a little extra money, it can be done. So we don't need to have big overheads and factories, and we can put together such a house easily. This is the exhibition where all this is shown at the Venice Biennale 2016. And you see on the right, there is a toilet shower unit with a very big span roof, which can also catch the water. So here we are experimenting with our masons at the German laboratory, and it shows us here how ferrocement is much more ductile than concrete is. Am I running out of time?
I think we're at the designated ending time. If you could maybe wrap up with a few closing words.
Okay, yeah. Maybe what I'll do is I'll just show you images, because I think I've explained the idea. So here are some paper being used as form work. And a few images of using urban waste. I would just like to end by saying that these are some student projects I'm showing. I think it's very important to, in this digital culture, in the academia particularly, I would like to make space for analog hands-on experimentation, to be able to think with the hands. I think it's very important that we have these embodied experiences of learning, and not just try to solve things with our mind through drawings. So yeah, here are some of the experiments. I'm just running through the slides. Okay, I think I should stop here.
The Q&A session will be handled by Eduardo Sadovia, who's part of the Biennale. But I'd just like to conclude by thanking you, and maybe two very quick quotes. One from something you wrote in the past, not just about architecture being the stage on which human stories are lived out, but how your work is about innovation and socio-economic abundance that results from research and investment in materials and building techniques. And seeing the amazing images of bricks calls into mind a quote, of course, from Louis Kahn, which I found paraphrased here on this desk. Go figure. It says, "You say to a brick, 'What do you want, brick?' And brick says to you, 'I like Anupama.' And you say to the brick, 'Look, I like her work too, but Auroville is far away, and here we can use a concrete lintel.' And then you say, 'What do you think of that, brick?' Brick says, 'I like Anupama.'" Anupama. With that, Eduardo, take it away. You do the Q&A. Thank you so much for a great talk, inspiring, wonderful work.
Thank you. Lovely comment. Thanks so much. I feel so bad that I've been looking like a ghost, but anyway, I hope the slides made up for it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Eduardo, are you there? Natalia,
Yes.
are you there?
Yeah, well, I don't know what's going on with Eduardo. He was there a few minutes ago. So, but anyway, Eduardo, are you there? Yeah, no, right now he left. So anyway, but thank you very much for your presentation. I know we are a little bit with time pressure, but you know, I wanted to you know, emphasize the work that you're doing with bricks. You know, it is amazing to see a material that has been created so many years ago and is still happening regardless of you know, other technology that is right now in the market. And so what is your experience with bricks you know, in other non-developed, like in more developed countries? You know, it's quite expensive to put them to build a wall with bricks, you know, and I don't know if you had any controversies in terms of a cost of labor in that regard.
You know, actually, this is a general question, not only for brick, for all materials in the West or the industrialized world. I think I have gone into if you go into the nitty-gritty, you realize that the industries are not necessarily efficient. In the beginning, when we began with industries, I found out, like, you know, it's not efficient to wash your own clothes and it's better to have a washing machine. But if you look at today's problems, and if you look at if a brick produced in a factory is going to take 4 times the energy, you have to ask yourself, what are the total costs? I would like to give the example, say, take Starbucks. Okay, sorry, Starbucks people, but I'm just explaining that if you go to a local cafe in Spain and Italy, just down there, and the coffee costs 1/3, it's good. And it doesn't have to be commanded centrally from somewhere far away. So similarly, what's happening to the entire building industry is that the whole cost that you pay is not actually the cost of the material at all, just like the coffee. It's the management of the coffee from one spot far away, and everybody else and all the overheads, all the codes for all of us to not allow humans to use their own intelligence. In the barista guy is in a small cafe is allowed to use his knowledge, or a wine guy. But the moment it's Starbucks, they have to give up their knowledge and still give the advice that was told to them to give. I'm very worried about the world becoming that way, particularly for architects, even in the developed countries, because architecture, unlike all those products like iPhones and everything, it still remains a custom-made object. Architecture remains custom-made. So each one is unique, and we can't just, if we do what the industry tells us to do, then we are assuming that their calculations are right. But we are the ones as architects who have the synthetic knowledge of the whole thing. So I feel that the Western bricks are expensive because they're doing it in a manner that is expensive. That's it. For instance, I've worked with so many Danish and other brick companies here. They want to offer you all the palette of colors. Do you want a yellow brick? Okay, we'll get the clay from wherever. You want a gray one? We'll get you this and that. It's the same thing with food, with everything. So I think it's time that we go into the details of the material sourcing and just don't assume that a brick is a brick is a brick. It's not like that.
Well, but good to know. We need to wrap up now because we have
Mhm.
another speaker, but thank you so much. I'm so sorry about the background that we couldn't fix from our side, but it's a good lesson learned. It doesn't work everywhere the same way. So yes, but next time we'll look into that. So thank you very much, and we look
Thank you.
forward for our next speaker, Mac Tier from Spectacular. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.